Okay, so how did the Silk Road make money when there was no single road, no single owner, and almost nobody traveled from one end of it to the other? The familiar picture is one merchant, one caravan, and one impossible journey. Silk leaves China, camels cross the desert, the cargo reaches a distant western city, and everyone involved gets rich because the price keeps rising with every mile. It is a good picture. It is also hiding almost everything that made the system work. One of the best clues did not survive in a palace, a treasure vault, or a merchant's private archive. It survived inside a paper shoe, placed in a tomb near Turfan, an oasis city in Central Asia. The shoe had been made from discarded tax records. Officials had written down who bought, who sold, what was weighed, and what tax was collected. Then somebody cut the documents apart and turned them into burial clothing. That accident preserved the economics. So take one representative merchant arriving at Turfan with a load of spice. The cargo is valuable. The merchant expects to sell it for more than it cost. But before that sale happens, the animals need water and fodder. A few may need to be replaced. The goods need somewhere secure to sit. The merchant may need a translator, a witness, a local buyer, a different form of money, and permission to enter the market. Then an official may place the spice on a scale and collect a fee before the merchant sees any profit at all. The cargo might be moving west. The money is already moving in every direction. That is the first thing the famous map leaves out. The Silk Road did not make money as one road. It made money as a chain of regional markets, and every market charged for helping the goods reach the next one. Most merchants never crossed Eurasia. They worked one section. A trader might buy goods in one oasis, carry them to another, sell them to a new merchant, and turn back. The next merchant moved the cargo farther. Then another buyer took over after that. The object completed the long journey because the people did not. That made the system more practical, but it also created a new problem at every handoff. The first merchant does not know the final buyer. The final buyer does not know the first seller. Every person in between needs enough profit to justify taking the next risk. If one market becomes too expensive, too violent, too heavily taxed, or simply stops buying, the chain can break while every physical road is still sitting exactly where it was before, and the merchant cannot wait forever. Animals keep eating. Water runs out. Guards and workers expect payment. A delayed sale is not neutral. Every day can make the cargo less profitable. This is why distance selected what traveled. A caravan could not carry everything a distant market wanted. Pack animals had limited capacity. Mountain passes, heat, cold, and scarce water made every extra unit of weight expensive. A product that was cheap and bulky might be useful, but usefulness alone did not make it worth hauling across thousands of miles. Grain is the obvious example. Grain kept people alive. It mattered more to ordinary life than silk, gemstones, or perfume. But moving a large quantity of grain overland on animals could consume the value before it reached a faraway buyer. So grain moved constantly, but usually through shorter regional trades. Silk, spices, precious metals, medicines, fine textiles, and gemstones could survive a longer journey because a relatively small package could be worth a great deal. Long-distance trade did not choose glamorous goods because merchants were trying to make history look exotic. It chose them because the transport bill eliminated most of the alternatives. That also means the famous cargo was only one layer of the economy. Our merchant still needs food. The animals still need fodder. Someone has to grow that food, repair equipment, manage water, raise replacement animals, and maintain the settlement where the market operates. At Turfan, even during periods of important long-distance trade, more people appear to have earned their living from agriculture than from caravans. That is easy to miss because luxury goods leave memorable objects. A piece of imported cloth might survive in a tomb. A jeweled cup might end up in a museum. An irrigation ditch does not look nearly as dramatic, but the ditch is what kept the town alive long enough for the luxury good to pass through it. The Silk Road could make an oasis internationally important without turning the whole oasis into a city of rich merchants. The merchant arrives because the market is there. The market is there because the water is there. Across difficult parts of Central Asia, that was the physical logic underneath the network. A route could not simply run in a straight line between two wealthy capitals. People and animals had to reach water, food, shelter, and places where damaged equipment or exhausted animals could be replaced. A settlement that controlled a dependable water source and a working market did not just sit beside the route, it determined where the route could continue. That gave oasis towns economic power. A ruler could tax passing goods. Stable owners could sell or rent animals. Innkeepers could charge travelers. Warehouse operators could store cargo. Guides and translators could sell local knowledge. Money changers could convert unfamiliar coins, market officials could verify weights, record transactions, and settle disputes. To the merchant, all of these are deductions from the expected profit. To the oasis, they are the business model. The location worked because travelers could not easily replace it. A merchant might dislike a fee, but the desert offered no competing tax policy. If the next safe water source sat inside one town's territory, avoiding the town could mean risking the animals, the cargo, and everyone traveling with it. Caravanserais made these stops more useful. They offered shelter, food, water, and protected space for travelers and animals. But the most valuable thing inside one of these compounds may have been information. A merchant needed to know whether the next road was open, whether a ruler had changed the tax, whether buyers had already received a large shipment, whether silver coins were accepted, and whether the next market was safe enough to enter. A bad price could hurt. Bad information could erase the whole trip. At night, the caravanserai becomes a market for decisions before it becomes a place to sleep. Someone has arrived from the next town with news of a closed pass. Another traveler says buyers there are paying more for medicine but less for spice. A money changer warns that one kind of coin will be discounted beyond the border. The merchant now has to decide whether to leave early, wait for company, change the cargo, accept a lower price in Turfan, or risk carrying it farther. None of those choices changes what the spice is. They change what the spice is worth to this merchant on this day. That is why the route could shift without anyone building a new road. Merchants followed the combination of information, safety, buyers, and cost. A town that became known as unreliable could lose traffic before its rulers understood what had happened. A town that became predictable could attract merchants even if the physical journey was longer. This is where the Silk Road stops looking like transport and starts looking like coordination. A merchant had to make decisions using news gathered from people arriving in the opposite direction. There was no live price board, no universal currency, and no single authority promising that a contract written in one city would be honored in the next. Cross one frontier, and the rules might change. The language could change. The money could change. The officials could recognize a different legal tradition. A merchant who sold on credit might watch the buyer leave for another jurisdiction before the payment came due. So how do you lend to someone who can disappear into another kingdom? You make disappearing expensive. Sogdian merchant communities became especially important across parts of the eastern Silk Roads because they created relationships between distant markets. Sogdians were an Iranian-speaking people from Central Asia, and their merchant communities appeared in multiple cities far from their homeland. A trader might leave one political territory and still enter a market where other merchants knew the trader's family, partners, reputation, or obligations. That did not create perfect trust. It created consequences. Written contracts could name witnesses and guarantors. Partnerships could divide the cost of a shipment. Community reputation could affect who received credit later. Someone who cheated a partner in one city might discover that the story reached another city before the next deal did. This was not a universal commercial court. Different oasis states still used different legal rules, currencies, and officials. Merchants combined written agreements, local law, witnesses, family connections, and reputation because no single tool could protect them everywhere. The route had physical infrastructure that kept the animals moving. It also had social infrastructure that kept strangers doing business. The surviving Sogdian ancient letters make this problem feel less abstract. They show merchant relationships stretched across enormous distances, with information moving through letters that could arrive late, after political conditions had already changed. The goods mentioned include metals, pepper, musk, wheat, silk, and other textiles, but the human pressure underneath the list is just as important. Business partners were separated from one another. Families were separated from merchants. A person waiting for payment or news could not refresh a screen or call the next market. They had to trust that a message would survive the same unstable world as the cargo. That delay changed the economics. A partner could make a decision with information that was already old. A political crisis could trap goods after they had been purchased. A family could know that a merchant was far away, without knowing whether the journey, the partnership, or the money had survived. The merchant network reduced uncertainty. It never removed it. Now come back to Turfan, because this is where the paper shoe stops being a strange archaeological detail and starts acting like a financial statement. Nearly 2,000 documents were recovered from more than 200 tombs at the Astana Cemetery near Turfan. Among them is a set of 37 tax receipts, probably from around the year 600, connected to a tax station outside the city. Officials recorded goods, weights, dates, buyers, sellers, and payments. They also tallied collections in periods of roughly 15 days. This gives us something rare, not a story about what the Silk Road was supposed to be, but records of ordinary transactions passing through one real market. Money itself added another layer. A coin accepted in one market might be discounted or rejected in another. Sasanian silver coins circulated in Turfan, but merchants could also use gold, silver, other coins, and bolts of silk in different situations. There was no universal Silk Road currency waiting at every stop, so a merchant could make the correct call on the product and still lose money during conversion. The buyer may value the cargo but not the payment the seller wants. A money changer who understands local acceptance is not standing outside the trade. That person is helping determine whether the trade can close at all. The Gaocheng Kingdom charged a scale fee tax on certain goods when they were weighed and sold. The surviving receipts include spices, gold, silver, silk thread, brass, medicine, copper, turmeric, sugar, and ammonium chloride. One recorded amount of gold was around 160 grams. One spice transaction approached 500 kilograms. Those two numbers tell you what the market was built to handle. A tiny amount of an extremely valuable metal could move beside a much heavier commercial load. The same tax station had to recognize both, record both, and collect from both. The names matter too. In this receipt set, 41 of the 49 identifiable participants had Sogdian surnames. That does not mean Sogdians owned the Silk Road, controlled every route, or dominated every period. It means that at this particular station, during this particular window, they were deeply involved in the trade being taxed. The timing is just as revealing. Several of the 15-day collection periods produced no silver coins at all. Traffic did not arrive as a permanent river of caravans, it came unevenly. A market might be active, then quiet. An innkeeper, animal supplier, tax official, or lender had to survive the periods when nobody important came through. Now look for the product that is supposed to define the whole system. There is no silk cloth in these scale fee receipts. That seems impossible until you understand the tax. The fee applied to goods measured by weight. Silk cloth was measured by length, so it moved through a different record-keeping process. The official standing beside the scale did not record the entire economy. The official recorded the part of the economy the scale could tax. That one omission changes how the evidence has to be read. A missing product does not necessarily mean a missing trade. A large number does not necessarily mean a dominant industry. Surviving records are shaped by the institution that created them. Animals were traded but recorded differently. Enslaved people were also traded in this world, a grave form of exploitation, and those transactions were handled through other procedures rather than this scale fee record. The paper shoe does not give us the Silk Road's complete balance sheet. It gives us something more useful than a false total. It shows how one oasis turned movement into taxable transactions, how merchant communities appeared inside those transactions, and how uneven the traffic could be. It also exposes a second contradiction. Turfan could contain foreign merchants, imported goods, silver coins, tax officials, and international connections, while most families still depended on farms, animals, and local exchange. The spectacular trade was a thin layer, but that thin layer could support inns, warehouses, translators, lenders, officials, craftsmen, and political influence, far beyond the size of the caravan itself. The whole system therefore depended on volume. A merchant might survive one bad sale. A service town could not survive indefinitely if the traffic supporting its businesses disappeared. So where did enough purchasing power come from to keep this thin layer active? The obvious answer is wealthy consumers. Someone far away wants silk, spice, metal, or medicine. Merchants notice the price difference and carry goods toward the demand. That was part of it. But in Tang-era Central Asia, one of the largest sources of valuable material entering the market may not have been a private luxury buyer at all. It was a political institution trying to hold a frontier. The Tang dynasty took control of Turfan in 640. Control meant more than a flag or a title. Soldiers had to be stationed. Officials had to administer territory. Horses, food, and supplies had to be obtained. People serving far from the political center had to be paid. Silk helped make that possible. Chinese states used silk in several ways depending on the period: as tribute, diplomatic payment, support for officials and soldiers, and in exchanges connected to horses. A bolt of silk could leave a government storehouse as a political or military payment, then enter the market as something spendable and tradable. Follow that bolt. It begins in state storage. It is sent west to support soldiers or officials. The recipient uses part of it to acquire food, animals, equipment, or another good. A local seller accepts it because the silk can be used again. A merchant acquires it and carries it toward another market. An oasis official may tax a related transaction. An innkeeper, animal owner, farmer, or lender earns money from the activity around it. The payment has become commerce without the state directing every sale. That is the hidden economic engine inside this part of the Silk Road. The market looks private because merchants are bargaining, carrying, lending, buying, and selling. But some of the volume beneath those transactions begins with government spending. The state was not merely standing beside the route collecting taxes. It was helping create the market that could be taxed. This does not mean governments invented all Silk Road trade. Exchange existed before Tang control. Private merchants responded to real demand. Local agriculture and regional commerce had their own foundations. Other periods and other routes operated differently. The point is narrower and more important. In this documented system, political finance could magnify private trade. It injected valuable goods, supported a frontier population, created demand for food and animals, and helped maintain the conditions that allowed merchant networks to operate. That makes the market powerful. It also makes the market fragile. The merchant arriving at Turfan can choose the cargo, negotiate the price, hire help, and decide when to leave. The merchant cannot control whether a distant government keeps funding the frontier. In 755, the Amlushan rebellion forced the Tang dynasty to redirect attention and resources. Tang forces withdrew from much of Central Asia. The major silk transfers tied to that military and administrative presence ended. The road did not collapse into the sand. The wells did not vanish. The tax station did not forget how to weigh spice. What changed was the flow feeding the system. Historians working from the surviving evidence argue that trade in the region then dwindled substantially. That does not mean every merchant disappeared or every route closed. It means a major source of liquidity, demand, and political support weakened, and the businesses built around that volume felt the loss. Picture the effect from the oasis instead of from the imperial court. Fewer officials and soldiers mean less demand for food, animals, equipment, and services. Fewer silk payments mean less valuable materials circulating through local markets. Fewer merchants mean fewer rooms filled, fewer animals replaced, fewer loads stored, and fewer transactions placed on the scale. The same infrastructure now has less traffic to support it. The pressure spreads beyond the market gate. A farmer who had been selling grain or fodder into a busy frontier town now has fewer customers. An animal owner keeps the same herd but rents fewer replacements. A translator still knows the languages, but fewer strangers need the service. The official responsible for collecting the tax can maintain the scale, the weights, and the records, yet collect less because the transactions never arrive. Nothing about those people suddenly became less capable. The economic system they were serving became smaller. This is how a famous trade route can shrink without one dramatic closing date. The line remains visible. The economic reason to use it becomes weaker. Political power could also push the system in the other direction. During the Mongol period, conquest brought enormous violence, coercion, and destruction, none of which becomes admirable because some merchants later found parts of the route more predictable. But once Mongol governments controlled large connected territories, they had reasons to protect trade and encourage movement through important regions. For a merchant, fewer independent political boundaries could mean fewer officials capable of blocking the cargo, changing the rules, or demanding another payment. The physical journey remained long. The number of political interruptions could fall. Security was not background scenery. It was an economic input. And even when political conditions improved, overland trade still faced competition from a different transport system. Ships could carry much larger loads with fewer people relative to the cargo. As maritime routes expanded and became more reliable, goods that were too bulky or too cheap for long overland movement could travel farther by sea. Port cities gained an advantage. Some inland routes adapted. Others lost relative importance. The Silk Road did not end because one empire closed one gate. Its advantage moved. That is why the paper shoe matters so much. The famous objects tell you what reached wealthy buyers. The receipt tells you what had to happen in the middle. A merchant had to find water, replace animals, understand local prices, use acceptable money, secure a contract, trust a partner, pay an official, and believe that another functioning market waited beyond the next stretch of difficult ground. The Silk Road was not economically powerful because someone drew a line between China and the Mediterranean. It was powerful when thousands of separate people and institutions made the next handoff believable. The merchants sold goods. The oasis sold continuation. The community sold trust. The government, when it chose to support the system, sold predictability and sometimes supplied the money moving through it. And when those things stopped lining up, the road could remain on the map while the trade quietly went somewhere else. That is what the tax receipt inside the paper shoe was recording. Not one legendary journey, but one fragile promise repeated over and over again. The animals will reach water, the contract will be honored, the payment will be accepted, and there will still be a buyer at the next market. The Silk Road's most valuable product was not silk, it was reliable passage through a world nobody controlled.